Hello, Annalise here. Before we get into today's episode, we just want to remind our listeners in the US to vote if you're eligible. There are 4 key voting details that we wanted to call attention to. 1. If you're voting in person, make sure you know where your polling place is and get in line early. 2. Double check to see if your state requires you to bring any form of ID when you go vote. 3. If you're voting by mail, please read all the instructions beforehand to make sure your vote gets counted and vote as soon as you get your ballot to help the USPS deliver it on time for Election Day. And 4. If it's your first time voting by mail, make sure you check to see if your state requires you to send in a copy of your ID along with your ballot.
Hi, welcome to Adulthood Pending podcast. I'm Kimi.
I'm Annalise.
I'm Brittany.
We are a podcast for college students, recent graduates, or anyone else who is figuring out that being an adult isn't as simple as it's made out to be. Join us as we share how we're navigating our careers, post-grad lives, and the whole adulting experience.
So today's topic for our episode is relationships, and we have a very special guest with us today, Kimi's partner, Erik. So Erik, if you would like to introduce yourself and kind of give a little background of where you are on your adulthood journey.
Sure. Hi, I'm Erik. I am Kimi's partner of 2 years now. Where am I in adulthood? I suppose that depends on your benchmarks for adulthood. I suppose if I think about a few more conventional ones, I haven't graduated yet. I'm a senior, so I'm still in school right now. Not financially independent yet. I haven't like lived on my own, like paid my own rent essentially. Like I've lived away from the house for like the better part of like 5 or 6 years, but still am not like fully moved out, I suppose. Not married or have any children or any of that part of life. So I would say I'm relatively early in the adulthood by these standards. And then of course there's always like do you feel like an adult? And no, I think my conceptual age is like somewhere around 19. So I'll be turning 23 in a month now. And I do think that that's like a few years later than I expect, but yeah.
So as we've tried in our last episode, we're going to try to ask questions so that our listeners can get to know us a little better. And the question for today's episode is, what is your love language?
So to give some explanation, there's a book written in the 1990s about the 5 different love languages, and it was this author's theory on how we like to give and receive love. So the author, Gary Chapman, broke this down into 5 different components, meaning acts of service, gift giving, physical touch, quality time, and words of affirmation. So we just thought that it'd be fun to share these to see how we are similar and different. To start off with, my love language is words of affirmation and quality time.
My love language is also quality time, but in addition to that, it's also acts of service.
My love language is, so with friendship, it's quality time, but I recently took it since being in a relationship. And that one was physical touch, which is really interesting because I wouldn't think that would be mine because I don't see myself as a touchy-feely person. But I think it's probably just because me and my current boyfriend are in a long-distance relationship. So that's probably what I lack most in our relationship.
I think mine is quality time last time I took it, but I feel like there's a lot of them that I appreciate, so I don't really know.
Mm-hmm. And the whole
Yeah.
concept of love languages is like, just like the Myers-Briggs personality test, just because you score highly in one of them doesn't mean that you don't like the others. It's just like the one that you might prefer according to this test.
Yeah, and I think like also, Brittany, you mentioned that you're in a long distance relationship, so you probably value physical touch more. I do think also that love language is dependent on your current situation and your current circumstance too.
Yeah, for sure. Because like when I'm there too, I think my love language also shifts to words of affirmation. And yeah, it's
Do you know if
definitely
words of
situational.
affirmation? Do you know if
What?
words of affirmation is your second love
Yes,
language?
it is.
Okay.
It is. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So if you want to leave a comment on our most recent Instagram post, you can let us know what your love language is so we can get to all know you better. So, Erik, as our guest on today's episode, would you like to kind of dive into your own personal thoughts about relationships?
Sure. I think one of the big things that I like to, I don't know, bring up about relationships is that all relationships are very different. And a lot of times we just use the vocabulary of quote unquote a relationship as if we're all thinking about the same model of a relationship. And I don't think it's that way at all. In fact, I think a lot of times what we're talking about when we say a relationship or they're in a relationship or we're in a relationship, we have a specific model that we've like inherently like inherited from society. And a lot of times I think for a lot of people that's like a heterosexual, committed, romantically exclusive and monogamous relationship. And those are all like, those are four completely different parameters that not every relationship needs to satisfy and probably doesn't, you know? And I think, for example, one of the easiest ones to draw attention to is like sexuality. I think the kind of relationship model that we think about a lot in society doesn't always work for queer people or people that are not straight, for example. Their relationships inherently look different. And you know, like gender roles, right? Gender roles get implicated in all of this. And then like what happens to like heterosexual or heteronormative gender roles in like a relationship with like, I don't know, two women or two men or even just two queer people, right? And so I guess that's something I like to draw attention to. So I like to share that because I think that's something that's really informed my perspective about relationships, and that's developed over time. A lot of that I learned a lot just being in a relationship with a queer person. Learning, it revealed a lot to me because I was someone who historically I've only really been in those kinds of relationships that I just described. And so when I started this relationship, even before starting this relationship with this person who identifies as queer, it started to reveal all these preconceived notions I had. And not necessarily how they're good or bad, but just like I thought this was how these things worked, and it doesn't have to work that way, or maybe you don't want it to work that way, you know. And I just think that's like important to consider. So that's what I think about when I think about relationships.
Yeah. Wow, Erik, thank you for bringing that perspective, especially since we are very limited between Annalise, Kimi, and I. I think it's important to acknowledge our restrictions that we all can talk about when it comes to relationships. And I think you bring a really good perspective that we just really can't speak to. So to give some more context for our listeners, Kimi and Erik, would you like to kind of go into depth about how you met and how you started dating?
Sure. Kimi, you want to start?
Yeah, so Erik and I met each other around 2 years ago. At the time, we were both juniors in college, and we had both downloaded Tinder around the same time. It was really our first interaction on Tinder using the app, and we were one of each other's first matches, so that was really exciting. So actually, during the time that I got Tinder, one of the reasons why I wanted to get it is because I had been single up until that point. I think I was, 20 at that time? And I felt like I was very content with who I was. So I was ready to like explore someone or let someone in to, or like explore a relationship with someone. And I downloaded Tinder pretty early on in the school year, and Brittany was actually there to help me with my creation profile.
Or your creation profile.
With my profile creation. So Erik was, as I mentioned, one of my first matches, and we started talking. And initially, I was very interested in him just because he was pretty straightforward. After a few messages, maybe within the span of 4 days, He was like, you know what? I like you. Do you want to go out on a date?
Oh.
And I was like, oh, this is so straightforward. Yeah, sure. And the funny thing about this whole situation is we went to schools within the consortium of 5 schools. So we like had mutual friends. We lived really close to each other, but we had never met each other prior to this. And probably our circles wouldn't have really overlapped if we continued college without meeting each other.
Mm.
But we met in person, had our date. It went really well. And then afterwards, I asked him for his number, and our relationship flourished after that.
Oh, it flourished.
It flourished. I do remember you going to the date. I remember because we were all living together at this point. And I remember it was, you got brunch, right?
Yeah, wait, Britt was like,
Yeah,
dude, Britt
wait.
We got
I
coffee.
Yeah, I remember like they had to meet at a certain place, and I had to like walk somewhere where that meetup spot was on the way. So I just remember I walked Kimi down and literally like hid behind this like bush and just watched her meet up with you. Did you know that, Eric?
I did. She told me after the fact.
Oh, so
Yeah.
you didn't see Brittany hiding, but you knew afterwards.
Yeah, no, I didn't see Brittany.
My
But
skill. That's how
I
good I
found out
am.
after.
Stealthy I am.
It reminded me of one of those cartoons with like the newspaper where you cut the circles in the eyes.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, Eric, what's your side of the story about how you and Kimi started dating?
All right, so my side, a lot of the details are the same, I suppose. I had downloaded Tinder as well, although my reasons for downloading Tinder were a bit different. I'd been out of a relationship for like maybe 6 months, and up until then, I had only been in like very serious, committed, romantic relationships. And I was kind of curious to try out this whole like casual dating, friends with benefits type thing that my friends were all about. And mainly just like trying to experience intimacy in a non romantic context, I suppose. And so that's why I downloaded Tinder. Matched with Kimmy pretty quickly. She was one of the first people I messaged, if not the first one. Yeah, and then I asked her if she wanted to go on a date, and then pretty quickly into the dating process, I was like, this is not the direction I would like. It was not the direction of like a casual relationship. But we continued to hang out. At some point, we talked about what we were looking for, and it wasn't quite a match, but we still continued to hang out and just, I guess, not really think about it. And eventually, we just decided to, be more serious. And I forewent the project of casual dating. And here I am now, 2 years later,
In a flourished relationship.
flourishing. Some would say trapped.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the running joke in our relationship is that I baited him.
She baited me into this loving, long-term committed relationship. The original Tinder project was a complete failure, aiming for like low commitment, casual interactions, and ending up in like a long-term committed relationship. I can't complain. I'm blessed, right? But
Oh.
the project was definitely a failure for sure. The original objective was not accomplished by any stretch of the imagination.
So yeah, that's been the joke that he never wanted to be in a relationship, and now he's in one. Britt, you're also in a pretty serious relationship of almost 2 years as well, and also long distance. So we have a lot of similarities. So I would just be curious to learn more about how you met and why you started to date.
Yeah, so I met my current boyfriend when I was the summer before my sophomore year. We were on this summer retreat for the Christian fellowship we were both a part of, but we both did not know each other going into it. But we were in the same group, and it was like a pretty small group, so it was maybe 5 other people. And so after that, we kind of kept in touch, but um yeah, I don't so wait. So after that, we just kept in touch, and I actually really liked him for my junior year of college, but he dated someone else. not salty about that, but
No,
and
she
so
really liked him.
I really did. He was
She would always tell me, and she would purposely go to church and drive him so she
okay,
can
that sounds
hang out
so
with
funny
him.
to me.
Okay, wait, I don't know how to say that.
No, you can keep that
I
in.
just
That's
think
I
it's
funny.
mean, it
such a
worked
detail.
out. It worked out, right?
Yeah, it's funny though because so after he started dating someone, I had to, in order to get over that crush, because he was one of two people I seriously actually liked during my time in college. Like I had little crushes there here and there, but he was one of the few people I actually liked. And so when he told me he started dating someone, I had to immediately switch to hating him essentially. Like ask any of my friends, I would always complain about him. I would pick the smallest things just to say, just to criticize him and not like him. So yeah, he was dating someone I found out our junior spring. And so we kind of talked, not really, most of senior year. And then senior year, we did this thing at our school. It was called Data Match. It was essentially you take this quiz, and it was very Claremont Consortium centric, and it was kind of a joke, essentially, and then they would match you with certain people, and pretty much everyone did it. Like people, my friends in relationships did it. It was kind of just everything everyone did, but I didn't want to do it. But two of my really good friends like just forced me to do it because just for fun. And then he was one of my matches. And yeah, so I didn't really think anything of it, but we started just like hanging out because we were friends before anyways. And then this was like 2 months before senior year ended, and then we were like, oh, we like each other, and so we just were dating kind of with the intention of breaking up after senior year, but using our relationship as a growing experience because I personally had not been in a relationship up until that point. And so yeah, we started dating, but we decided to continue dating after graduating. So we've been long distance for I don't even know, over a year now. And he lives in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm based in LA. So yeah.
Cute.
Thank you, thank you.
So what's it like being in a long distance relationship?
So being long distance has been really interesting because in school it was my senior year, and so my priorities were probably one, friends, two, school, three, him, which I know sounds bad, but I had at that point most of the time during our relationship when we were together intended to break up with him after graduating. And so going long distance, he kind of became number one very quickly. And I think it was hard for me to adjust to being dependent on, or trying to balance not being dependent on him as a partner and trying to find my own happiness when at the same time I was most of the conflict in my life was being in a long distance relationship because I missed him so much. It was really hard for me to adjust not being with him every single day. So yeah, it's just well, he very quickly became my biggest source of conflict in my life, and I had to also at the same time try really hard to find my own happiness outside of my relationship with him, in order to sustain the healthy relationship we currently have.
Yeah, I could have imagined how that would be tough because you just graduated, so you're entering this new phase in your life. You're in a relatively new relationship, and he's not like anywhere near you. So you're just like, there's just a lot of changes in your happening in your life that I feel like could be pretty difficult, which makes sense why the beginning of your long distance relationship could have been hard.
Well, Kimmy, you and Eric were also long distance, right? Because Eric, I believe you took a gap semester, and
Yeah.
Kimmy, you're still in school, and then I guess you're long distance now as well.
Yeah, so Eric and I, we never I mean, going into a relationship, we could not foresee what was going to happen. And like, we've actually been long distance for almost a majority of our relationship, which is
Mm.
kind of funny because
No,
Eric never
definitely the
wanted to
majority.
do,
Two
okay, a
thirds,
third.
2/3 of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Eric never wanted to do long distance. So
He didn't even want a relationship, though, to be
I know.
to be fair.
Here we are.
Dated.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I wasn't really interested in a committed relationship. And not only did I end up in a committed relationship, I ended up in one that very quickly became a long-term relationship, a long distance relationship, and is like continuing to be one. But yeah, it was like we only had a little bit of time together before we were suddenly quickly separated. Because we met in the fall of our junior years. And Kimi had actually just gotten back from Japan, so she wasn't even here for the spring, and I was there for the fall. And then let's see, and then summer. But when was your Silicon Valley internship?
Yeah. So then we met in the fall, and then summer, we had those 3 months apart. You decided to take a gap semester.
Wait, what about spring though, junior year?
Spring
We
junior
were
year, we
together,
didn't.
right?
Yeah, we were together.
Yeah, you were together. You two were together.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So we had spring together, and then summer we were separated, and then in the fall I took a semester off, and then Kimi worked an internship. So we went like that was like a 9-month window where we didn't see each other, um, summer and
Consistently.
fall consistently. Yeah, we like made trips to see each other. That's the other thing about long distance relationships is you got to really plan time to see each other, and it also costs money too. It's like
Yeah.
a non-trivial
Yep.
amount of money.
I had to add a long distance relationship into my budget. Like
Oh my
section
god,
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah, and I just saw
Yeah.
my bank account steadily decreasing while I was not making any money. But
Yeah. I mean, that's
um,
super, super valid, I think, to have to budget. Because once you're in a relationship, that is another thing to think about financially.
Mhm.
Because, it's not even just about, like, even in relationships where you're not long distance, you're still spending money.
Mhm,
So,
right.
mhm. Yeah. Which we actually think like I think our long distance relationship is less than the total like the total amount that I spend in a long distance relationship is less than if we were to see each other all the time because it's maybe like one large expense every few
right,
months.
right.
But still, it's like a large chunk of money that you have to allocate.
I think it's more. I think it's more than we would normally spend.
Because the total sum is just so much
It's just like
of cost
airfare
of right,
and
right.
Yeah.
food. They just get it's just large. It's a cost that would not exist otherwise.
Mhm.
And but yeah, I mean that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Yep. That's how it has to be.
Eric, how has parts or factors of your relationship changed since being long distance?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say, and this is just a trait of long distance in general, is there's a lot of stuff you can't do when you're not in person. So it draws attention to, I guess, well, one thing for certain is communication, and making time for each other is like much more important. Because when you're in the same place, like when Kimmy and I were at school, like she might have said this earlier, we did not live that far apart. Like even though we were at separate colleges, they were right next to each other, and I could practically like throw a rock at her window. But that meant that we had a lot of circumstantial interaction. Like it was very easy to like get a meal together, or if I wanted to go visit her or something like that, it was just like very easy. But long distance, especially with the time zone difference,
Yeah.
because I'm on the East Coast and she's on the West Coast, it's like 3 hours, right? You have to actually like plan your interactions, and you have to make sure that your interactions that you do have are satisfying the needs of both people. So for example, I'm naturally not a super social person. Like I enjoy interacting with people, but I would say like my baseline state of social interaction is much lower than most people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's become a lot more obvious through long distance because um like the amount I have to make more of an effort to communicate and initiate interactions with Kimi than I might otherwise naturally do. Um, and then she also has to keep in mind that like my my keeping to myself is not have to do anything with the relationship. It's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a quality of my personality, I suppose. And so
Right.
I guess to bring it back, one thing that's changed is it's put a lot more weight and importance on scheduling time together and making time for each other.
Mm.
Yeah.
Kimmy, do you have any insights of how you think things have changed?
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think definitely being in a long distance relationship kind of like enhanced the potential conflict that was already there.
Mm.
Like one of our main conflicts is that like Eric isn't as much of a planner as I am. So when it comes to stuff like scheduling calls when we are in different time zones, it's just a little harder because there's days perhaps when he doesn't want to talk and I'm not aware of that. So I
Mm.
think over time, like my expectations for the relationship have shifted to a state where like we're able to compromise on talking every day, or talking, or like if we aren't going to talk every day, talking about that in advance. So I'm aware that if he's not communicating, that's why.
Mm.
Um, and I'm not sure if it's like common for couples to talk every day. That's something that I really enjoy, but like Eric and I, we don't really text at all throughout the day. If we text at all, it's like to communicate when we are going to talk, or we'll just
Mm.
send like random Snapchats throughout the day. But what does your long distance relationship look like, Brittany?
Yeah, so I really like talking every day, just well, mostly through text, um throughout the week because we also have a time zone difference, and so he's 2 hours ahead, and I normally my work ends kind of later than most work schedules. So we try to call at least twice a week, and then throughout that, I like to at least like catch up with him through text every day, like at the end of the day for a little bit. So from my experience on social media, aka TikTok, I feel like one of the two prevailing attitudes about relationships are either one, it's a lot of work, a lot of compromise, a lot of um, communication, or two, um, you should never settle for anything less than perfect. Like, if this man or this woman is, or this person is not doing it for you, there's someone out there who's going to give you 100%, meet all your needs, and um, just be that partner that you've always wanted. And so I was just wondering if, like, either one, you agree with either of those two sentiments, or two, like, why is there such a contrasting, why are there two such contrasting attitudes about relationships, and how do you make sense of coming to terms with like each of those?
As someone with only one relationship experience, I feel like I can't necessarily speak to that. I don't know, Eric, what do you think? Eric's had more partners than we have, so
True.
So it's, I guess, a debate of whether it's someone is worth the time and like the commitment and the compromise versus if you should just drop that person and wait because someone better might come along.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I see. I think I'm familiar with what you're describing here and this kind
Thank
of media portrayal.
you.
Like this very black and white, like dramatized
Mm-hmm.
or romanticized perhaps perspective about relationships. I definitely see the one where it's like people are very quick to tell you to leave a partner, for
Yes.
us for any sort of reasons. And I often think that some people that are so quick to make those suggestions would not be quick to make the decision if they were in the other person's shoes.
Mm.
And that's just like relationships are not easy, right? They take a lot of work,
Mhm.
and they will inevitably have conflict. I think it's people are very quick to pass judgment on other people's relationships. And
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy when you only hear parts of the story, right? When you only
True.
hear about
Mhm.
some explosive argument that really brought out some like bad
Yes.
side in
So
someone,
true.
right? When in reality that's a situation that might occur like once every 3 years or something. And so suddenly you have that in your model, this incomplete model of like your part of their partner, right?
Mhm.
Um and so yeah, I think I've definitely seen that, at least this like very black and white. And I don't encourage people to just like, I don't know, like keep searching for the perfect person, because I really think people also don't even know what a perfect person is, or what that would look like
Mm-hmm.
for them. Like it's
Mhm.
so
Mm-hmm.
hard to know what your needs are until you start interacting with somebody that starts to meet those needs, and so
It's
like
true.
I think if a lot of people they yeah, they maybe they let's I don't know, they I don't want to babble either, like yeah, I think just like a lot of people don't even know who who they could have a great relationship with to begin with until they
Mm.
start one, I suppose.
Mm.
So
Yeah. And I
yeah.
also, to that point, it's like you don't know who, if that person will fulfill your need, but you also don't know how you yourself will grow. And I feel like as you grow and
Mhm.
your needs and your wants will
Mhm.
change. And I
Mhm.
think so. Someone was telling me also that they think that they will find their quote unquote the one a lot
Mm.
easier now, especially with dating apps, because you have
Mhm.
so many more ways to find people.
Mhm.
And you just have like you have literally one app where you can
Mhm.
go through all the eligible people in your area, whereas
Mm.
before it was like, oh, this person I meet, they could be the one, and like you don't know who else is out there. But
Mhm.
then for people, I wonder if the reason why people are so quick to drop someone is because they know that there are other people out there because of
Mm.
dating apps or something.
Mhm.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think
I
dating
feel.
I think
Go ahead.
I think the whole dating app thing that you're suggesting does provide this, I won't say illusion, but provides this idea that there are so many people out there, so
Yeah.
many
Mhm.
candidates, and I do think that that has changed the relationship landscape, for better or
Oh, for
worse.
sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. And definitely I think I could definitely see how that contributes to what you're describing here. Yeah. I mean, like how many times does does one of your friends, they I don't know, as soon as they get out of breakup and then like a week later they're like back on Tinder, like meeting new people or
Mhm.
something like
Mm-hmm.
that. If anything, people will go towards an app like that to
Right, right.
help navigate, the exiting of a relationship, right? Getting over
Mhm.
someone, seeing new people, right? And so I
Yeah.
mean it's definitely changed the game for sure.
Mm.
Yeah. Speaking of dating apps, Kimi and Eric, you met on Tinder, and Kimi went on to find a relationship or find a long-term
Mhm.
relationship. Yeah. And then Eric, you went
Mhm.
on to for casual dating, as you said, as you mentioned earlier. So at what point did you go from, okay, I'm using Tinder to casual dating to, okay, I'm messaging Kimi and I'm going to do this long-term relationship or a committed relationship rather.
Oh.
So that came after I had spent a lot of time with Kimmy.
Mm-hmm.
So the more Kimmy and I were hanging out, the more I really liked Kimmy. Um, and it was very apparent that this was not going to be like a casual relationship or like a friends with benefit situation.
In what
So
way was that apparent?
we talked about it and
Yeah.
you were not interested in it.
Okay, okay. To give
But were you
background
okay with
on
that,
like
Eric?
Was I okay with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was okay with it. And I also didn't want, because she wasn't interested in that, I didn't want to like push that subject any farther because
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked her, and so I didn't want to compromise whatever relationship we already had. But as we like kept hanging out more, it like more and more, I think Kimi and I both wanted to have more of a serious relationship. And part of why I didn't want to be in a relationship was I just wanted more time to be single and quote unquote work on myself. I definitely had some stuff that I wanted to, I did not want a commitment to get in the way of me doing certain things in my life and working on certain things about myself. And eventually Kimi convinced me that I would still be able to do that within a relationship. And that took me a while I had to think about that for a while. And because I had been in relationships in the past, and after a while I believed in myself that like, yeah, I can still grow and like do things I want to do within a relationship. And after that, it was a pretty easy decision. But it was, for me, it was that hurdle of really believing that that the relationship is not going to impede my life. And I don't think it has. I think if anything, it's made it much better. And she's been a supporting figure for a lot of those like aforementioned goals that I talked about here. So it's like it worked out well.
Wow.
And to clarify, because I feel like I sound like a schemer, I dated him and then convinced him and all of these things. To clarify, when, like, now to refresh my memory, on the first date, he asked, like, what was your intention of downloading Tinder? So straight from the bat, we were very clear on our intentions of getting the app. And, like, I feel like we both had the mindset that we could be talking to multiple people while using the app, which I think is something that when people first get Tinder or any other dating apps, they don't necessarily consider. Like, I feel like when you install an app, you can't assume that the other person is only talking to you just because that's not how the app is set up to be. But as we continued to talk more and I learned about why he didn't want to be in a relationship, I was like from the get-go a little confused because all of the things that we were doing in my mind seemed like a relationship, like just the amount of communication and contact we had with each other. So it was at that point, 2 months after downloading Tinder and meeting, that I was kind of like, well, why aren't we in a relationship? Like, why can't we add this title? Which was something that Erik was against because he didn't understand the purpose of having that title, which for me, it was important because I was just like, why not? If we're doing everything that already is a relationship.
Erik, can you elaborate on why you didn't feel a need to put a title or a label?
Yeah, I can.
Just curious, not like putting blame, but just because I feel like some people just don't like the label, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can talk about that, especially because I feel like that's a point of contention for a lot of people. They're like, like I've heard from actually some of my female friends in particular, they'd be like, why do these men, why are they so averse to commitment and not want labels and stuff like that?
To DTR and stuff.
This like, right. And I would say for my case, it's like a lot of it has to do with what does the label mean, I suppose. And we've been talking about a relationship as like this idea or this entity that we all seem to be on the same page about, like a relationship, right? When I think a relationship itself is a very, I don't know, complicated thing. And every relationship has like different structure and different parameters. And so to me, like, it's important, what does the label mean? Yeah, what does it mean when you say we are in a relationship? Like, I think for a lot of people, when we talk about quote unquote a relationship, what we're really talking about is a committed, heterosexual, romantic, monogamous relationship, or some like combination of like these types of things, is what most people think of. And yet we refer to it as like a relationship, as like this kind of universal concept, when that's just one specific model of a relationship.
Sure.
You know, And so if somebody has the idea that saying like we're in a relationship means that thing, it's important to me that we define that, what that means, before you attach any label to it or something like that. I feel like a lot of people go the other way around. They'll do this labeling process. They'll be like I don't know, a guy will ask a girl like, do you want to be my girlfriend, or the other way around, and you'll agree like, okay, let's be in a relationship, but they won't explicitly outline all the details about the relationship, like what the expectations are for intimacy and exclusivity and stuff like that. And so to me, it's more important to do all of that. And you don't even need a label to do all of that. The label is almost like secondary. It's at the end of that laundry list of things to discuss, expectations to assemble. It's like, okay, now what do we want to call it? You know? And so like, to me, the label was never so important as it was as being on the same page about how the relationship operates. And the label was important to Kimi, and I'm okay with the label. I should clarify with that like I was never
right.
To me the label is not significant for that reason. To me, the label is just a after effect, I suppose.
Right. It's like, what does that label entail, and what are the different elements of this relationship that you're going to define really mean?
Exactly. Yeah. So for me, I guess, and maybe we don't need to put this in, but for me, label and commitment did not go hand in hand. I think some people some people think that when you're averse to a label, it also means that you're averse to commitment. And I think for a lot of people, that could be what's going on. But I would say in my case, I was averse to the label because it seemed like it was bypassing the entire conversation about what the relationship would look like, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think like this is something that society has kind of drilled into so many of us, is that you have to have a label for a relationship.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
for sure.
And I think labels, I don't know. I think people use labels more as like tools than or something. No,
like a way to like not go into to not communicate properly, maybe even like they'll be like, oh, we're in a relationship, as a way to avoid the more serious conversations, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's some way, like maybe not avoid, but they'll use the label as a tool. So, or like, for example, a common one is like my boyfriend, right? So in the same way that we are in a relationship is like a label, you know, in that way, saying like, that's my boyfriend is also a label. And so some people will use that label to like communicate some sort of like ownership or something like that. And to them, it's important. The label is important for other people. The label, in that sense, the label has like a social significance. And I've seen that a lot with like my friends and I don't know, my people, their other relationships, like where the label is important to someone to communicate to the rest of the world. And I could see that that's like valid, that's justifiable, you know. To me, that's not as important. To me, the label, it's more important that we agree on the label and what it means, I suppose. But I think definitely it has a lot of people, the label has the significance of the label is different for everybody. And I think I think it's important to sort that out.
Yeah, so we sorted that out pretty early on, and I think that was really helpful in understanding our expectations for the relationship, just starting off. And like, I think that's why, I mean, we didn't really have a lot of conflict in the beginning of our relationship because things were just so clear. And I remember a few months into knowing Erik, I was like, wow, you know, if we ever break up, I'm going to totally use these skills for my next relationship. Just because I feel like it was a really good like structure and how to be intimate with someone.
Should we talk about conflict? That's pretty juicy.
We should talk about your experience with labeling and DTRing, Brittany.
Yeah.
I mean, mine was I feel like I don't have much to contribute just because it's pretty straightforward.
So when did you and your partner
we are going to this.
DTR? So that's like a topic of contention for a lot of people, is DTRing, right? That's something that everybody wonders. That's like a step or something like that. That is like, that's difficult to navigate sometimes. And, so I'm curious what your experience was like with with taking the, what was it like, that process from going
Yeah.
from more friendship to like, something more
Yeah.
serious?
And I guess especially because you two went into the relationship thinking that you would break up in like 2 months.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what was that discussion like?
Yeah.
To define
So-
the relationship, and then to, I guess, what did it mean afterwards when you decided to do long distance and to stay committed?
So we have this ongoing joke that basically I did all the work in initiating every single thing in our relationship.
Nice.
So
In
I
what
will say,
way?
well, because I was the one that kind of like broke or like crossed the line of being like, hey, I think I kind of like you, like more than a friend.
Ooh.
And then we were you were and then I was like, I think like, yeah, we should try something more and just see how that goes. I will say, because we had 2 months left of our senior year, I was just kind of, everything was easier to initiate because it was just like let's just try this and see how this goes kind of thing.
Right.
And so yeah, when we first started dating, we were kind of both on the impression, we were both on the same page of thinking, okay, yeah, this is kind of maybe not the smartest idea to start a relationship with 2 months left where we're gonna be together, but I like you enough to see what I can grow from in this relationship, and I think you'd be a good person to do that with. He was in a relationship a couple times before, but not anything super serious. So we were kind of on the same page of like, yeah, we just want this relationship to be something we can learn from, and maybe learn in the future what we would want in relationships. So yeah, defining the relationship was kind of just like, okay, like let's date, we'll keep it really open-ended. But yeah, that's one thing we did not communicate super clearly, but it was pretty prominent that we wouldn't maybe continue it after graduating, just because we knew that he wasn't going to be in the same place where I was going to be.
So, Britt, I think that's really great that you were the main initiator in your relationship. But that leads me to wonder how gender roles play a part in a relationship, whether that be the forming of one or once you're actually in one.
Like the idea of like who wears the pants in the relationship.
Exactly.
I don't know. It's, first of all, I don't want to shame people who do think this way, but I feel like there's a prevalent expectation that girls really like to be chased. And I will say, maybe if the circumstances were different, I would have wanted him to make the first move, but we had 2 months left in school, so I was like, if this guy's not doing it, like I gotta, take the reins here. But I don't think that's really defined how our gender roles have played a role in our relationship, because I really think it's just like based on our personality. Like I like to initiate things a lot more. I like to be upfront when we have conflict. I really just I like making sure everything's on the same page, whereas he is a little more lax in terms of not thinking that maybe if we have a conflict, we have to solve every single problem. Like it will just kind of play its course. And so I don't know, like I guess maybe to some people that would sound negative, like I'm the one who has to take reign in the relationship and quote unquote have wear the pants and like call the shots. But it's not really something I've really attributed to like our gender. Like it's like not something I shouldn't be able to do just because I identify as female. It's more just, I think, based on our personality.
When you say gender roles, Kimmy, what are some examples? Like you said, like wearing the pants, for example, but I'm not even, we haven't even clarified what that means. And I think that can have a very ambiguous definition. So I don't know, to
Yeah,
continue the conversation farther, I would be curious to A, clarify what that means, and then B, other examples of gender roles. Because they do
Uh-huh.
exist, right? But I think that's important
Exactly.
before even having the conversation, right?
Uh-huh. Well, I think gender roles are created by the historical sense of like women are the ones in the house, men are the protectors and the providers.
Mm,
So in that sense, I feel like early on that can play a role in the relationship with the man paying for everything. And
mm,
like the woman perhaps
Mm,
being the planner, or being the one that coordinates more social gatherings.
social
mm.
gatherings.
Do you think
Really putting her
Nathan
on the
felt an
spot here.
obligation? Do you think Nathan felt an obligation to pay for dates? And did he pay for dates? Or
Um,
was that even something that was even that any attention was even paid to?
I think back to kind of just like habits we've had just as people. He paid for date or so he paid for maybe a few meals within our first date just because that's just who he is as a person. He even if he's with a group of friends, he'll pay for everyone. He's just that's how he views money and I think how he attributes like showing he cares. Um and so wait, what was the other part of the question?
Oh, it was just like the whole money thing. Like if that was something that was ever that you two ever like thought. Like for example, with me and Kimmy, our first date, we went on a coffee date.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure whether to offer to pay for her coffee. In fact, I didn't initially. And then after the fact, I was like, oh, should I have done that? Would you have preferred if I paid for your coffee? But so that
Oh.
was like an example of like, I didn't know what she expected. It's
Mm.
Mhm.
possible she would have expected and highly preferred or been upset if I didn't at least offer, right?
Can I just
And
say, like, I hate it when people pay for me for it, like makes me feel uncomfortable. So when
Mhm.
I was in a long-term relationship in college, and a lot of times we split the bill pretty
Yep.
evenly, or it was like you pay for what you got. But
Uh-huh.
then like there was one time last year that I went on a date and I was just so anxious about them paying or offering to pay that I showed up to the place early to order for myself and then pay for
Oh my
myself.
gosh.
I think I showed up like 5 minutes early. It was at a
that's
coffee
wild.
place and I showed up 5 minutes early and I was like, I'm gonna find a spot and I'm gonna just order it and say, oh, I got here early and I ordered and I got at the table. Cause I
I
was
mean,
just
that's a good way to do it.
yeah, like cause that way you don't have to have like the whole, oh, I'll pay, no, I'll pay, And so I was like,
Mhm.
F it, I'm gonna pay it for myself. And then I just got there 5 minutes early and I paid for my drink and I found a table. It was a really busy coffee shop anyway.
Mm.
And that's what I did.
Yeah, so I think
Like,
that's like a great example, right? Like even if the gender roles are not like actively occurring, where it's something we're thinking about,
Mhm.
right? And it sounds like in your case,
Mm.
Annalise, it's something that you were anxious about, like navigating that
yeah,
conversation.
because I just feel personally, I feel uncomfortable with people paying for me. I don't know why. Um, even though like, and I just, it was okay. I think like the other thing was like, it was my first time meeting this person. We were messaging on a dating app. And so we didn't have like an existing relationship, at least with my ex. We were friends first. So it
Mhm.
wasn't like as uncomfortable or awkward to talk about. So it was easier to just be like, oh, I'll pay. No, 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 I'll split half. And then it was, I think, just like when you go on coffee dates, it's more iffy because they're not super expensive depending on where you go. Like it's not a full meal.
Mhm.
There's no drinks involved. It's just a cup of coffee.
Mm.
So I was like, do I really want this person to be paying $3? Or can I cover $3? Like I can cover $3.
Yeah.
But now I'm
Yeah.
curious, would you, so it sounds like, so you don't like people paying for you, Annalise. I'm curious
I
what
mean,
Kimmy and Brittany have to say about like how, if you were to go on a coffee date with um, a man, I assume that you're both heterosexual or straight.
Mhm.
Would you prefer? What would you prefer? What would you prefer? Would you prefer that they pay for your coffee? Would you prefer that they ask to pay for your coffee, or would you prefer that something else?
And we're speaking specifically coffee, right? Like not a meal
Yeah.
that includes alcohol
Mhm.
where the bill is much higher than a coffee bill.
Well, we could do both, you know,
Oh,
like,
oh,
Ooh.
oh, I
I
actually
think this is a question that, like, I don't know, me as a man, like, I feel like your male listeners could be interested in wanting to know, like,
That's true.
what what you would want, because I was a question I didn't know the answer
Mhm.
to, and I was like anxious because I was like,
Yeah, the
shit,
whole
afterwards,
idea
like,
of like
should I
paying.
have paid,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And
I,
so I think, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I'm gonna cut in. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
no, no, why?
I think for me, if the date involved something more than the price of a coffee, I would be if they I would appreciate it if the person, if like the guy I'm going on a date with will offer to pay, and I would either go, oh, no, I'll cover half, and if they're like really insistent, then I'll be like, oh, then I'll get the next one if it was like a good date,
Mm,
or I'll just like cover half. But yeah, that's what I would want, I think,
mm.
for
Wait,
at
so to
least them to like
clarify,
have that initiative or like to offer to pay for the whole thing, and then me either going like, oh, let's go half, or oh, I'll pay for the next one.
okay,
Mhm.
versus a guy just straight up asking, yo, can we go halves? You prefer that he offer and then put the ball in your court to split it.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
You want to be able to.
I'm curious, and I know for a fact you could have male listeners that are curious as well.
Mhm.
So
You know for a fact.
I mean, yeah, I was in that spot. I've talked to some of my male friends about this, and
Mhm.
most of them just offer to pay, and very often pay. And I have female friends who have no issue getting a
Yep.
free meal. In fact, they'll
Mhm.
go on Tinder dates to get like a free sushi dinner or something like that.
Ooh.
And
Brittany. Ooh.
yeah, it sounds like a good deal, right? But yeah, I'm curious what you would prefer.
What about you
Mm,
two, Brittany and Kimmy, for preference?
yeah, for me, I remember actually our first meal that we got, he paid, and I remember stealing the receipt because I don't know, he took the like bill so fast and then just gave it. And then I think at that point I was like a little offended. I was like, you're not even gonna like ask me if you want to like pay, like, because like, yeah, Annalise, I
Mhm.
do feel, I understand, like I feel uncomfortable because I feel like I like owe them something.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
I
so
think that's it. Yeah.
yeah, and
Mhm.
so like he just did it without me like even like seeing it, and then all of a sudden he got the check, and then I was like, what the heck? And so I remember taking the receipt and like trying to Venmo him, but then he like blocked me.
Oh,
And so I could never.
Wow.
I know,
persistent.
I know. So but in that play, like I don't know, for me, I feel like that's frustrating because that just makes me feel like the male is just trying to protect that gender role of like the
Mhm.
provider.
Mhm.
And then he's just doing it to like feel good about himself. When I
Mhm.
personally, even if that's at the expense of making me feel uncomfortable, but I will say I feel like my view is a little less common, where I feel like I don't like not having people pay for me.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, when Eric and I went on our first date, basically he went up, ordered coffee first, got back in line to wait for his coffee, and then I went up and ordered. And then afterwards he was like, "Oh shoot, should I have paid for you?" And I was like, "Oh wow, that's first just really honest and candid. Thanks for that." But also,
Mm.
I think in the moment when he didn't offer, I was like, "Oh, is this a date?" But then I was like, "Of
Mm.
course it's a date. Like he asked me on a date." And afterwards he clarified, like, when he asked me, "Oh, should I have paid?" And I was like, "No, it's completely fine. Like we could go half." And I'm a scriptsy,
I
meaning
was just
that
gonna bring
like,
that up. Yeah.
yeah, like since we were in this college town and he knew that I was coming from a school that has feminist values, like I would be okay with it. And I
Mhm.
think moving forward into like perhaps other relationships, I would be always fine paying half. But
Mm.
that's not to say that all girls are the same way. Like I think
Mm.
all three of us are very liberal in that we are willing to pay our part. but that's not
Mhm.
necessarily the case for everyone.
Mhm.
And on top of that, I feel like something that makes me uncomfortable, besides like feeling like I owe someone something if they pay for me, is
Mhm.
that it's almost like they don't think that I can pay for myself when I feel very independent and like I've worked for so long. I can afford to pay for my own meal. You don't need to pay for me. It almost feels like insulting that, like,
Mhm.
like if you're thinking like historically, where back in the day, women didn't make much money at all and the man provided for everything. Like now in modern days, that's not how it is. So why are you paying for me?
Because
Mhm.
women earn less than men. Oh.
Oh.
Oh,
Oh.
well,
Yeah, I was gonna say that like
I
there
mean,
I
we
think
could
there
do the
are feminist
multiplier.
arguments for not paying, and like
Mm,
women put a lot of like time and effort into relationships, and also like even just literally looking nice for dates, like they spend a lot of
mhm,
time preparing, and a lot of men put little effort, and on top of that it just takes less effort to maintain appearance, like
mhm.
like
Mhm.
feminine products, they just like it's like a
Pink
tax,
tax.
right?
Yeah,
Yep.
pink
Yeah,
tax.
and so yeah, I think there's also a feminist argument for like not wanting to pay as
Mhm.
well, but and so that
Yeah.
just like complicates the landscape farther, right? But I think it's
Mhm.
interesting,
Mhm.
Kimmy, that when I didn't offer to pay, one of the questions that popped into your head was, is this a date?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Mhm.
Oh,
because
right.
it was clearly a date.
Yeah,
Right,
I
because we
know.
had talked about it being a date, but somehow like money and the splitting of costs was implicated in this definition of a date, right? And I
Uh-huh.
think that
Mhm.
just like sheds light on this like this
Mm.
this long history of gender roles that we're still now negotiating. But
Mhm.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. I do think just for I think it sounds like between the three of us, we all like it if the male if like so okay, let me rephrase that. I think amongst the three of us, we all prefer it if the person we're on a date with will offer to pay first.
Mhm.
Mm.
Am I getting that
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
I mean,
just
I
pay right
think I'm
away.
also, maybe it's my personality, but like if the end of the date was nearing, I would be like, I would initiate like, oh, let's just go half.
Yeah, not
So
even
I
like
think
when I
that's
say
fine.
offer, I don't mean like they'll be like, "Oh, do you want me to cover?" But I mean like they'll put down their card first
I see.
and then like they'll and then you can be like, "Oh, let me,"
And they'll be
rather
okay
than
with
being
it.
right, rather than being like, "Oh, do
Yeah.
you want me to pay?" But them to like actually do the initiating of the payment and then to you to be like, "Oh, wait, no," and then to have like that little, "No,
Mm.
it's okay. No, 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 no." You know what I mean?
But Britt, didn't you say that when you had this experience, you were offended that the guy didn't ask you, and that he did just like swiftly initiate the payment?
Yeah, I was a little. I was just like thrown off because I'm like, he obviously I know he was doing it from a very caring, non-malicious standpoint, but I feel like in that instance he was not being considerate of my feelings and my um
Mm.
yeah, like what would make me feel comfortable in the situation when it came to money. And so, yeah, I just offended in the sense that I feel like
Was it because he
mhm,
did it so quickly that it didn't give you time for you to be like, "Oh, let me
Mm.
cover half,"
mhm,
rather than like,
yeah,
do you think it would have been better if he had like not done it so quickly that it gave you an opportunity to jump in and be like,
exactly. Yeah, I
mm-hmm.
wish he would have done that. I wish he would have given me because at that point it also puts me um in the awkward position of like, "Oh, what's your Venmo?" Like, "Oh, wait, so
Right.
do you expect me to
Mhm.
pay you half?" Like that leaves it more ambiguous. Um
Mm-hmm.
which I was not a fan of. Yeah. Also, for context, when Kimi mentioned Scriptsies and all of us are having feminist values, it's because our college is an all women's college. I don't
Yeah.
know if
Mhm.
we've made that clear.
Or historically women's
Yeah,
college.
historically women's college.
Mhm.
And a what does
Oh,
that mean from
yes.
a paying on a date's
Mm,
perspective? I mean, I think it's like can be inferred, but it might be worth clarifying. So for
Well,
all
it,
your listeners, I guess.
it means
Yeah.
that like, okay, through any schooling, of course, you're indoctrinated, right? And whatever beliefs that the school is going to be projecting. And
mm,
because our school is a liberal arts school and a school that like emerged during the 20s, like during the 19th Amendment and stuff, there are feminist values that are taught from the beginning. So our values are very feminist and like, yeah, I guess that's what it means.
But you're implying that means you would prefer to pay, or you would prefer not to, like,
I would
you would
prefer to
prefer
have
not
the
to
Have the option.
option.
having the option, right?
Yeah.
Or yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know what
so
I said initially, but
guess
yeah, you would
I
prefer,
think
yeah,
I
something
guess
different than what is
feminist
typically.
I guess feminist in the sense that like we want to be included in conversations and have our voices heard. And these are just one of the small conversations that we should be included in.
I think a lot of men don't have a very keen understanding of what feminism is.
Yeah,
And
I
Mhm.
understand. Yeah,
and
because
why that might.
like people, the feminist spin on that, the typical, I think, would be like, oh, women have to pay half or whatever, like when
Mhm.
that's not necessarily always the case.
Right, it's like a difference, like you just said, like I don't know, for example, a man might think like, oh, for like equality they should pay half or something, or they might want to pay half, when the real thing that's like emerging here is you want to be part of the conversation here,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
want, and that's like a different idea than like the actual practical application, right? Whether or
Mhm.
not it's like split or not. And
Mhm.
and I don't know, I think that's worth
Yeah, no,
just
for sure.
clarifying or something like that.
Mhm.
But because
Mhm.
that's like, I don't know, that's like, I think that's cool, right? That's an elegant way to describe it. And
So, as we've mentioned, each of us are currently in or have been in a long-term relationship. So I was just curious about what are some things you've learned since being in a relationship, and especially since graduating.
One of the things that I've learned is I think there's been like a transformation in how I view myself. Like, I think before entering into a relationship, I was very like, yeah, I'm an independent woman. And then, in a sense, I felt like if I was to get into a relationship, a sense of that identity would be lost. When a
I
way, in a
feel.
way, like, of course,
Mm.
that sort of happens because you're dedicating time to another person. I think I've learned that, like, there are parts of myself that are still dependent, that are like still healthy, that I
Mm.
wouldn't necessarily have thought about earlier.
Can you give an
Um,
example?
like things like when we were back at school, Eric and I, and when I would need to do something or he would need to do something, I would be like super happy to just kind of go along for the ride or like want someone to be there with me. When maybe it's a sense of like me seeking that companionship, being extroverted, and also a sense of efficiency. Cause it's like, okay, let's get in like some of our relationship time right now when I'm like going to the store. But I think it's just been really nice to like have someone around and kind of like to be your champion
Mm.
when that's something that you have less outside of a relationship. Because even though you have friends, like friends are more, they more prioritize themselves and their family before you versus in a
Mm.
relationship, it's kind of like a combination of the three. What about you, Eric?
I would say being in a relationship has definitely shown me a lot of ways that my actions, or my lack of actions in some cases, have effects on other people, not just my partner.
Mm.
Um, just like things like, I don't know, like so for example, if I do my own thing for an entire day and don't check my text messages until like 7 p.m., like that doesn't, no one is no one is checking on me if I'm single. But when I'm in a relationship with Kimi, sometimes she wonders like, is he okay, or like, did he make it out of bed today or something like that, and so that's an example of me not, just like me not being like like immediately present, maybe having an impact on another person, or me being very anxious, for example, because I've I don't know, I've had issues with anxiety in the past. Just like if I have a very anxious episode and I don't navigate it well myself, that
Mm.
can that can induce a lot of anxiety and concern in my partner, right? And so
Mm.
I definitely think that certain behaviors or the absence of behaviors that I had before being in relationships, once I was in a close relationship with a partner and our lives were like very intertwined, it became more obvious how some of those things can affect another person, and I was maybe a bit more conscientious about them, even with people outside of my relationship, even with platonic relationships. I feel like I've like learned some of that. Have any do you have any do you have anything to add, Brittany, or anything to say?
Yeah, I felt similarly to Kimmy in when I thought I was going to enter in a relationship. I thought I would be sacrificing a big part of my independence and my um own ability to take care of myself and sustain all my needs by myself. And because that's something I took a lot of pride in, as I feel like I was a very self-sustaining person. And so being in a relationship and kind of having a partner that does have an effect on my own happiness and my own um, ability to kind of take care of myself, I feel like I've learned that that's not necessarily a negative thing, because how I also choose to navigate those conflicts or those problems that maybe would arise and have a negative effect on my happiness is also like an independent motive for me. So in that, it's just like my independence kind of navigated in conjunction with someone else. And so I don't think I lost that independence. I just think I was like reworked into something that I have just has another factor added into it. And also, I think it made me really empathetic for people in relationships, because for most of my um college time I was single, and so I saw other friends in relationships, and I would kind of be like, why do you care about that? Like, why is this making you upset? And then being in a relationship, I'm like, oh my god, I so understand that.
Yeah.
If I was in their shoes, I would go wild right now. And so in that sense, I become more empathetic for other people in relationships, but also empathetic for other people in general, in terms of how maybe I'll hear other people's conflicts and think, you know what, if I were in their shoes, I'm sure I would feel the same way. And so I've become a lot less judgmental since having the experience of being in a committed monogamous relationship.
Like, that's the thing. Like, Eric, you mentioned this too, about how like you only hear one side of the story when people complain to you about like having fights, but it's not something that you like. When you hear it, you're kind of like, oh, okay, whatever, they're arguing again. But then when you're in a relationship, you're like, oh crap, I get it. But yeah.
Especially
Wait,
if it's like a recurring theme.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like I think sometimes when you listen to other people's relationship problems, you're like, gosh, he always does this, or she always does this, you
What
know.
is
And
wrong
then
with that?
exactly, right, or they have some deep flaw, and then when you're in your own relationship, you realize that like, oh, you always do this thing, or they always do this thing.
Yeah. And
And
it's not that easy to resolve.
exactly, right, you know, it's not just situational, it's not always situational problems. Like, people in relationships have recurring themes, you know. I definitely agree with you. Like, being in a relationship gives you more perspective on other people's relationships, and helps you understand them and their emotional situation better. I felt that way, at least.
Yeah.
Annalise, what are some things you've learned from your experiences of being in a relationship?
So I was in a long-term relationship all throughout college. We were dating for about 3 years, and then we broke up about a year ago. So right when I moved to Boston and started working around that time. And I think looking back, something that I really learned was we were pretty opposite in terms of our personalities. Like, I was at that time a lot more extroverted and he was really introverted. And I think that in ways he helped me mellow out. Like, I was extremely extroverted and I was extremely like loud and energetic. And over the course of us dating, I definitely feel like I've gotten calmer. And I don't know if it was just because I was with him and he was a really calm person. But yeah, I think I've become more introverted, more calm, and I've also become better about, like you were saying, Brittany, like having empathy towards people, because it wasn't so much about my needs and my wants, but his needs and his wants too. So it's trying to see things from both perspectives in a relationship. And I think also being more willing to compromise is something that I've learned to do more of and to be better about. Yeah, and I feel like that is something that I've applied to a lot of my friendships that I've now created post breakup and post college as well.
Annalise, so you had mentioned that you have gone through a breakup, through a pretty serious relationship. How was that experience for you? And maybe what are some things you've learned from that experience?
Yes. So I did go through a pretty rough breakup, only because we were in a really serious long-term relationship and then we weren't. And I feel like looking back, and even like I think like even in the moment I kind of knew like, yeah, okay, this breakup sucks, but silver lining, the timing of it was pretty good, just because we had both graduated, we were both starting like a new chapter in our life. So we had things to distract us with, and or at least I did. So I hung out, like I started a new job, so I was focused a lot on that. I met a lot of great people, and actually I think one of my good friends, or a couple of my good friends at the time, were all going through breakups, so we had that to talk about as well. And so I mean, breakups aren't easy, obviously, especially your first one. I feel like your first breakup is really tough. At least mine was. But to have friends to support me, and then to have a job that I could distract myself with, that helped as well. And again, I think just like it was like, breakups aren't ideal unless it's you're in like a toxic relationship or something you need to break up. But in our case, it wasn't. And so to have that breakup, but the timing of it, of starting a new chapter in your life, I feel like the timing worked out of when it happened.
And you also had mentioned like you and your ex-partner were very opposite. So has that turned you off to future relationships where you're like very opposite from your partner? Like, do you think that opposites can work out?
I think so. Yeah, I don't think it has turned me off from finding someone who's different from me in terms of like having polar opposite personalities. I think that, I mean, if there's anything that I learned from that relationship, it's that you can make it work, especially because we were in a relationship for 3 years, so it was like it clearly worked to some degree. So I don't think it's turned me off from finding someone who's different from me.
Do you have a question, Erik?
Have you been in other relationships
Since or before?
before?
I was in one relationship in high school. Yeah, it was a short one. It was like a couple months.
Because like 3 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And I imagine that the length of a relationship, and definitely like some people are married after 3 years. So like I think a breakup, and this is not to minimize breakups for any other length of time or any other relationship, because they're all uniquely difficult. But 3 years is a long time, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I'm just curious, like, what makes a 3-year breakup different than like maybe like a 6-month breakup or something like that? Like, were you considering life together? Long-term life, or because if that's the case, then like a breakup is like, wow, we are that's off the table, right? Or else something else where you're like, maybe you're in college and you're unsure like what the future is like Brittany said, like originally her and her, wait, are we saying Nathan in here now?
Oh yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, you could just say her.
Originally the relationship actually had an expiration date, right? So I feel like that's a totally different situation than like planning the future together, right? And I'm just curious what that was for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, 3 years is a long time, but we're also talking about like 3 years of college, which I feel like is different. I feel like dating in college can be really different from dating after college, because after college suddenly feels more serious and real because you're not like in this college bubble, So yes, it was 3 years and that does seem long, but I feel like because we were in this college bubble, it wasn't do you know what because we were in this college bubble, it doesn't feel as long as say 3 years post college when like
Right. You have different priorities in a college relationship.
yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. And you don't have to consider certain aspects of the future. You can just focus on like the now, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yeah, I feel like relationships in college are more based off of convenience versus like post-grad adulthood is more based on choice. Like you actually have to make time to see this person
Yeah.
rather than just seeing them throughout the day at school.
Yeah, and it's like, well, do you move in together?
Exactly.
Do you, if one person wants to move somewhere else, do you follow? Whereas in college, it's like it's not something that you have to think about until later on, like senior year or something.
Right. So do you think that after graduating and starting lives, right, and starting new chapters, right, do you think that is what that leads to a breakup? And if that's the case, do you have any recommendations for people that are in relationships in college, about just know that your relationship is like tied to your time and space, right? And like, or if you feel like that's the case, or I guess where I was going was, do you feel like the sudden separation and the starting of new chapters helped facilitate the breakup?
Okay, so one advice that I have for people who are dating in college is to appreciate it in the moment. Like, don't worry about what happens after college because you already have enough on your plate about finding a job, passing classes. Like, you don't need to worry about your relationship. Just like enjoy it in the moment and make sure you communicate. I think that's something really big, is to communicate and make sure both of you are on the same page about where this relationship is going and your expectations. And then just like enjoy what you have. But to your point about, do I think it facilitate or it is that extra push? I do feel like for some people, when they graduate and you go to different like you move to different countries, different states, you have a discussion and it ends up becoming like the factor in the breakup. Not everyone, obviously, but for some people that is the case.
So to wrap up this episode with our guest, Erik, I thought it would be fun to share a few of the stories that Annalise and Britt have of their first impression of meeting Erik. So I know I clarified earlier that I'm not a schemer, and what I'm about to say sounds really schemy, but I promise it's not. On I think my second or third date with Erik, we went on a walk around our school, and I wanted him to get a chance to meet my roommates, but I didn't want it to be like very high pressure. So we were just like walking around our school, and I was like, "Oh, like, do you want to come see my room? Have you ever seen a script storm?" And he hadn't. So we all lived in a suite together. So that meant that there's basically 6 rooms and 1 living room in one unit. So I like opened the unit's door for Erik to meet Annalise and Britt and my other suite mates.
Honestly, I don't fully remember meeting Erik. Apparently, I have that going on in my life where I just don't remember meeting people for the first time. But I do remember like Kimi introducing Erik and I was like, "Oh, hi, hello." And suddenly I realized my pants were unzipped and I couldn't tell if either of them knew. And if anyone knows me, they know I'm pretty awkward. So for some reason, I thought it was smart or the right decision to bring up that my pants were unzipped. So I did, and I apologized profusely. And I think I like turned around to zip it up. Is that right? Like I don't. But it was so honestly, I don't have a first impression of Erik because I was too busy worrying about my pants being unzipped, I think. Erik, what was your first impression of me?
I thought you were entertaining. I mean, I did not, in fact, know that your pants were unzipped. I did after you clearly
After I mentioned
explained
it. Right.
But
I
you
made
were
it a
very
point.
excitable. You had a lot of energy. And I was like, okay, this is your friends are a reflection of you in some sense. And I was like, okay, these are some of Kimmy's friends. Like, they sound fun and interesting.
Oh, thank you. Apologize about my pants.
Yeah, my first time meeting Erik was kind of unremarkable. I think I just like said hi. But I remember one of my favorite memories with Erik was we had lived with another friend who was also just starting our same relationship around the same time I was. And I remember later on, that friend, her name is Kristen, she had mentioned to me, she's like, I just had this really long conversation with Erik. He just gave me such good tips. He's so insightful. And I remember being so jealous because she had gotten his phone number and he had like friended her on Facebook. And I was like, what the heck? He did all this for you. Like, I want his phone number. I want him to friend me on Facebook. We're all just like vying for Erik's attention. And I think I had told Kimmy this story like months later after the fact. And then that night I got a friend request from Erik. And then I was like,
I wonder why.
Yeah.
So, to conclude, what are your tips or takeaways from either being in a long distance relationship or being in a relationship or going through a breakup or just anything relationship related? What is one tip, trick, takeaway that you want to give our listeners?
I'll go. So, one of the tips or things that I've learned throughout being in a relationship is something that people often stress, but I feel like it's hard to understand unless you're in one. And that's that communication is very important in a relationship. And I think that's one thing that has made our long distance relationship successful is just like communicating those expectations in advance or having those check ins to make sure that everything's going smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
Along that line, I would probably encourage people to think about the expectations you have in your relationship. I think a lot of people have unwritten expectations that they maybe don't even know about, and then their partner doesn't know about it until they get disappointed or not met. And so I really think a lot of problems come from not being on the same page about your expectations. And I think a really big one for that is like communication. And so I feel like it's always helpful to just check in with your partner about your current level of communication, and if that is satisfactory for both of you, and if it's not, what you like about it and what you don't. I think that's a huge one. People always say communication, but I think communication is a really strong reflection of expectations. It's a really common thing where you could have different expectations, and I think that's part of why it's difficult for a lot of people. But yeah, I would encourage that.
I think that in a relationship, it's okay for you to figure out yourself first before jumping into a relationship. And there's nothing wrong with being single and to not be in a relationship. This coming from the person who is single. But I honestly do think that it's okay to not be in a relationship and, take time for yourself, figure out what you want before diving into one. And before diving into one, but also it's okay. It's great to be in a relationship too, if that's what you want. Not everyone wants a relationship, but some people do. And I think to figure out what you want and what you want in a relationship too is great. I think to figure out what you want and what you want out of a relationship is something that is okay for you to take time to figure out.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't know how cliche this is gonna sound, but I think what I've learned in a relationship is that like the expectation society or people give in terms of like the romanticized version of a relationship is so skewed and
Mhm.
like there's no possible way the first or second, like whoever you're with is just going to automatically meet all the needs that you want. Kind of like what Eric said, like you really need I think a lot of conflict arises out of just lack of understanding people's expectations. And so along that thread, I think people should never couples should never shy away from arguments, which is kind of cliche, because I think arguing is very healthy in terms of just really airing out your of course to a certain extent it's healthy, but I think just because you argue a lot does not mean that you're in an unhealthy relationship. Of course there are caveats to that, but I think in the beginning of my relationship I would shy away from bringing up any sort of conflict because I was afraid I would fight about it, and that was a sign that our relationship was like not meant to be. But there's just like literally no way for those things to be aired out if we didn't have those arguments, if we didn't work out those problems. And so I feel like I'm still working on this, but I try not to let my previous perception of the romanticized version of society's view of relationship have an effect on how I personally think my relationship is going.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. First of all, thank you, Erik, for being a guest on our podcast. The first guest so far.
Yay.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And for our listeners, thank you for listening. You can follow us at Adulthood Pending Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And we're at Adult Pending Pod on Twitter. You can also send us an email to hello.adulthoodpendingpodcast@gmail.com, which is also linked in our Instagram bio. Join us every other Monday for new episodes. We can't wait to share our stories, and we're excited that you're with us on our adulthood journey.
Bye.
Bye.